Party Scoopers. Sam and Kevin are here to go at it. Cannot wait to hear what the topic is today. Kevin, I believe it's your turn.
At Cleveland, also the site of the 2016 Republican National Convention.
See how this all ties
All comes
See
together.
how I segued that? Wasn't that
Perfect. Perfect.
That's why you pay me the big bucks.
But we are talking about kind of leading up to a convention, presidential candidates.
There's a ton of them in Iowa this week. We had for a fundraiser for Joni Ernst over the weekend, and Bruce Rastetter, his annual big party that he invites a lot of Republicans and big name people. Marco Rubio was here, Ted Cruz was here, Ron Johnson, senator out of Wisconsin, is here. I don't know if he's a presidential candidate, but he's a significant Republican in the U.S. Senate. Rand Paul got in the state yesterday. He is touring all over the state, and it's very interesting the approach he's taking. Very different from Jason. I know you're a big fan of his dad. Rand Paul is really trying to reach out to all manner of Republicans, whereas Ron Paul really appealed to the liberty wing, the libertarian wing of the party. Rand Paul is going all over the state doing fundraisers. He did one for Steve King last night.
Wow. He's
doing one for Marionette Miller Meeks, who's running in the 2nd Congressional District today. He visited the Republican Victory offices, which those are basically the campaign headquarters that are all over the state, Council Bluffs and Sioux City, and I think he's doing Des Moines today. So it's interesting what he's trying to appeal to, the entire spectrum of Republicans, which is very interesting. I think Rand Paul is probably one of the front runners right now. And then the family leaders having their big event on Saturday, and you'll have Rick Perry and Rick Santorum, who won the Iowa caucus in 2012, Bobby Jindal, the governor from Louisiana, Tim Scott, senator from South Carolina. I mean, it's just, if you're a political junkie, this is a huge week for you here in Iowa, because they are all here, and all, even if they're not running for president, they're at least trying to get their name out there and get more national recognition.
Sam, I don't want to step too much of your time, but does Rand Paul need to appeal to all these different groups to win?
I think so, because I don't think he's going to have the allure with some of the people that his father did.
Because he's a little more moderate.
He's a little more moderate. He's a little more mainstream. I think he's a smarter politician than his dad was, and I think he realizes that to branch out, he's going to need to appeal to a wider spectrum of Republicans and independents as well. But really in the Republican primary, you have to appeal to Republicans, but he needs to go farther than just the libertarians. He's going to have some problems. He's flip-flopped a little bit on some issues, Israel being one of them. A couple years ago, he said, hey, we should cut off all funding for all countries, including Israel, and now he's a big backer of Israel. So he's going to have some issues on, where he stands on the issues, and trying to play the difference between being a Republican or being a libertarian and being a social conservative. I mean, some of those issues do not mesh very well. So it's going to be interesting, but it's going to be a fascinating week for sure.
And one example of just on the issues in Rand Paul that kind of brings it back to state politics is the issue of impeachment. I think yesterday he was doing an interview in Nebraska, and he said that impeachment should not be on the table. We shouldn't be talking about that with the president. Obviously, Steve King has become kind of the poster child for this impeachment movement. He's out there doing cable news interviews every day, like he tends to do, talking about how impeachment, we've got this president that's out of control. We need to have this on the table. And looking at the U.S. Senate race, Joni Ernst has also floated the idea of impeachment, said we should not rule that out. And I think obviously this is going to be a problem for Republicans on the issues. And I think that's why you see the Ernst campaign in particular really trying to move the conversation away from these issues, because there's such a divide in the Republican Party, and definitely between the Republican Party and independent voters and Democrats. The Iowa Republican had a column this morning that was based off of NRSC, which is the national group that oversees Republican Senate races, and it was about how Joni Ernst is an Iowan. And that's the kind of conversations that they want to have. It's just, these just common sense things that nobody's arguing. We all know Joni Ernst is an Iowan. What's next? Is next week Joni Ernst is 30 years old and therefore can constitutionally serve as a U.S. senator? They want to focus on these very basic things that people aren't necessarily arguing. They don't want to talk about the issues because people like Ernst have embraced these really fringe Tea Party ideas like impeachment. Like the most recent one last week with Ernst was that states have the right to nullify federal laws. If there's a federal law that a state disagrees with, you can say, nope, not going to listen to that one. And so I think that's just kind of a preview of where, this national dynamic with the presidential candidates, people like Ron Paul, how that's going to play into the U.S. Senate race, where people are looking for somebody like Bruce Braley, who's actually out there talking about the issues. He just had a press conference this week in Iowa with a small business talking about the need for a minimum wage increase. And you have people like Ernst, who the only thing they're hearing about them in the news right now is, Ernst has this very fringe position.
Well, let's talk about impeachment first of all. She has not embraced the idea and said President Obama needs to be impeached. She said if he goes beyond the realm of what his constitutional powers are and what Steve King is talking about, if he issues de facto amnesty, which he constitutionally does not have the power to do, but he's talking about doing, then Congressman King says if he steps beyond his powers and issues this blanket executive order making laws where he doesn't have the right to do that, then we should consider impeachment.
But Rand Paul says it's off the table. He's going out there. He's saying proactively we should not be talking about this.
Steve King's a very outspoken guy, and he says what he believes, and we'll see what happens if Obama does do that. In terms of nullification, I assume then, since you believe it's shouldn't be done and can't be done, then I assume Bruce Braley is against what Colorado and Washington State did by legalizing marijuana.
But Bruce Braley is not out there talking about how this is.
Does Bruce Braley believe those states went beyond their constitutional powers?
Joni Ernst is
Are
out
they
there.
defying federal law?
Let's talk about what Joni Ernst is doing.
Are they defying federal law by legalizing marijuana?
Let's talk about Joni Ernst.
What is Bruce Braley's
Has
stance
Bruce Braley
on that?
ever sponsored a resolution saying that we should nullify federal laws?
Okay, you don't have an answer because Bruce Braley doesn't have a stance.
I know you want to change the topic away from this.
No, you brought up nullification, so I'm asking you a question. That's a question. They went above federal law. Colorado and Washington State did. Marijuana is against federal law. Possession of marijuana, that's a federal crime. It's legal to possess it in the state of Colorado and Washington State. So that's nullification. They nullified that federal law. So what is Bruce Braley's stance on that? Does he defy what those states did?
You can ask Bruce Braley that, but what I'm asking you is...
You represent his campaign. You tell me.
What I'm asking you is, has Bruce Braley ever sponsored a resolution saying we should support nullification of federal laws?
I believe obviously.
Joni Ernst has in the state Senate in Iowa.
Yeah,
she sponsored a resolution saying...
She says states should have the right, and the comment that you're basing this off of is she said if the federal government goes beyond what the states believe is in their rights, then the states should have the right to fight back against that. That's what Colorado and Washington State did. The precedent has already been set. So what is Bruce Braley, the constitutional lawyer, the trial lawyer, what is his stance on this? Is he opposed to what Colorado and Washington State did?
First of all, the nullification issue with Ernst is not based on one thing. It's based on the fact that she sponsored the resolution. She's been out there on video at Republican
because she believes in federalism. She believes we are a government built on states' rights, which is the right point of view. She believes if the federal government goes too far, then the state should have the right to say, you're going too far. That's why we have 50 separate states. That's why we are a republic. Not one huge, one-size-fits-all federal government.
It's such a fringe idea that nobody, except people like Joni Ernst.
It's such a fringe idea, except Colorado and Washington State are doing it, and you can't answer whether or not Bruce Braley is for it or against it.
We can get in the weeds on nullification all we want, but we can also look at other issues.
Okay, so it's a fringe idea that two states are doing.
We can also look at where she stands on things like the renewable fuel standard.
She supports a renewable fuel standard.
Your own website, The Iowa Republican, has an article that says she flip-flopped her position on it, where she's been on both sides. So which one is she at now? I mean, this is your website that you write for.
Yeah, she supports the renewable fuel standard. And it's funny, you guys want to cite the IowaRepublican.com, except when it says something negative about Bruce Braley, then all of a sudden, oh, it's just a partisan website, but yet you use the IowaRepublican.com in your ads. So which is it? Are we a legitimate news outlet or not?
I want to go back to, because you guys both talked about flip-flopping at the beginning, and this is something you hear in every campaign. Well, so-and-so has changed his position on an issue.
And it happens all the time.
Yeah, I change my position on issues.
I was going to say, is it so wrong to change your mind or to learn something and say, you know something, I might have been wrong, now I want to be correct? Is that so wrong as to admit that maybe you were thinking about it the wrong way?
I don't think that's wrong, but I think you need to be clear when you're asked about it now. You have to have a clear answer. And on the renewable fuel standard, Joni Ernst has, and her campaign was quoted last week as saying, in a perfect world, we wouldn't have the RFS. But she's also trying to say that she supports the RFS. And so I think you just need to, if you do change your position, you need to give a reason why, and you need to be clear about it.
There is a clear reason why. I mean, in a perfect world, we wouldn't have government subsidies. We wouldn't have the federal government or the state government picking winners and losers, saying we're going to help you out with taxpayer money here, or we're not going to help this business out here. In a perfect world, they're right. We wouldn't have the government getting involved in this. But she's aware how important the renewable fuel standard is, and ethanol and biofuels are to the economy in Iowa. So she supports it. That makes sense.
And she also
Perfect world,
supports.
gas would be free.
Right,
In a
but-
perfect world, yeah.
Yeah.
And there's such an imbalance between government support for renewable fuels and clean energy and the billions and billions a year given to big oil. And that's where it really comes down. Like, why is Joni Ernst not in favor of repealing some of those tax breaks that big oil is getting?
I don't know. She might be. I haven't talked to her about that issue. But she said that it should be equal. And oil gets a lot more subsidies than ethanol does, a ton more. So,
Yeah.
if we're going to do it, we should at least make it equal between the two.
And people always talk about ethanol subsidies, and you look at the carrier fleets we have in the Persian Gulf. That to me is a pretty big subsidy. I mean, oil is subsidized.
Well, it's an
in a
energy
lot of ways.
source that's produced here. We're not getting it from a foreign government that's
Right.
not, very nice to Americans and doesn't believe in our way of life.
Right.
So.
All right, so we're just getting going. I'm sure we're going to have a lot of activity in 2 days at the Iowa State Fair.
Yep.
In case you're trying to find any of these guys we're talking about, chances are really good.
Yep.
In about the next 2 weeks, you can find them down on the east side of town.
Rick Perry is the one who was definitely slated to speak at the Register Soapbox. I imagine there will be others who at least visit there. I don't know if they're going to speak at the Soapbox, but Rick Perry, the governor from Texas, will be there, and I'm sure others are going to be dropping.
Well, and
Kevin,
Bruce
you're-
Braley and Ernst and those guys that will be there as well.
All the
If-
Iowa
yeah,
politicians,
if you
everybody
wanna
running
hear
for
them.
Congress, Governor Branstad, his opponent.
And we're going to have a bale of hay we're going to throw right out front of the Great Day
Well,
sign. So if
yeah.
you want to come here and talk on the bale
I was
of
going
hay.
to say,
we
you
can do
both
that
have
too.
connections. We have a 4-hour morning show that airs
plenty of time
every
to
weekday,
fill.
so get them in here.
Wonderful. Thank you guys so much.
Thank
It is
you.
7:34.